Hey guys, today we are going to tackle a very important issue, and that is what to do when you have kids who are maybe close in age, maybe not, but when you have younger kids that are surpassing the older kids in knowledge. And how do you handle that sibling rivalry that goes on with your kiddos when they're not all advancing at the same level, or maybe when the younger ones are advancing above the older ones? So we're going to be talking about that today. So let's get started. So this is an issue that I'm very well aware of because you have to understand our family dynamic a little bit. I have 6 kids total. I have a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And the 2-year-old and 1-year-old are about to turn 3 and 2. Okay, you also have to understand not only are they very, very close in age, there's 12 months and 2 weeks between each of the 4 older ones, and then there are 13 months between the younger 2, but you also have to understand the personality here, guys. I have 2 kids, my first and my fourth, that have some special needs that cause them to learn differently, to look at life in a great way, but in a different way. I have 2 out of my 6 kids, super overachievers, like always shooting for top, right? Very competitive, very advanced, and really love to excel in everything they do. Then I have 2 that, for every indication, seem to do really average, right? They're really like textbook. If this is what time you typically would learn something, they typically learn it at that point. So we have a lot of dynamic here, and it can be really, really, really tricky because, especially with those kiddos with special needs, there is some of this happening between the siblings. And some of them are blissfully unaware, and I'm so thankful for it. And others are very aware and constantly competing. So we're going to be talking about some really practical tips on what can you do to help minimize that comparison game and to help them to understand the gifts and talents God has given them. So tip number 1 is to do exactly that. Make sure that they know, every one of your kids knows what they are good at. Make sure they understand what God has gifted them with. I'm not talking about building up like a worldly sense of self-esteem. I want my kids to find their identity and their esteem in Christ, not in themselves, because ultimately we are all sinners, saved, in need of God's grace, right? I don't want them to have this giant head and this I'm better than you thing. But God did create them uniquely in His image, uniquely one of a kind. There's no one else just like them. And I want them to be able to see and understand those differences, especially because that helps them learn more about the God they serve, right? If they understand that God made them this one specific way, how much more in awe will they be of God and giving the glory back to God versus themselves? So be sure to really take the time to do that with your kids. Do it yourself first and write that out. That's actually part of the planner that I use. They sit there and they go through and list off the strengths and weaknesses of each child, so you kind of have an understanding, and it really makes you stop and think through some of those things. But it's also good to do this one-on-one with your kids. Also, I do never, ever, ever open up talking about weaknesses between siblings for each other, because that's just opening a whole can of worms. You don't want to go there. But we do open up talking about each other's strengths, okay? I recently saw this great post from Not Consumed Ministries, and she had this great idea where she just stuck a piece of paper up on the wall for each kid, and it said, things I like about Sarah or Bethany or whatever, right? And she had one for each kid. She hung them on the wall, and she just every once in a while would go over there and write something on there that she appreciated about that particular child. And guess what? Without any prompting, the siblings started adding things on there themselves for each other, right? This is a great way to build up that understanding of how wonderful they are and how God made them unique and special. Doing something like that, having everybody go around and say what they're thankful for about that person or something like that. These can be really, really helpful things. So have them understand their identity in Christ. Have them understand how they are specially and uniquely made, because this will make a big difference in the long run when it comes to comparison. Because we can't always do things to adjust whether they get compared or not. Maybe they never have an issue. I have kids that legitimately do not care where they are in relation to their siblings or their friends or whatever. They're just, because of the way God has made them, they just are blissfully unaware of that. But there will be points in time where other kids have and will compare them, where bosses, other teachers, other adults are going to judge them. And oftentimes that will happen out loud and will be expressed to your kids. So if they are grounded in Christ and grounded in who they are and who they are created in, whose image they are, whom they belong to, then they're going to be okay. Okay, so now tip number 2. We've got that foundation. We have that understanding and that constant recognition of who they are in Christ. So now let's talk about curriculum. First of all, we talk a lot in our family about how we're competing against ourselves, right? We are trying to do our best for the Lord, not unto men. So what our scores are, we actually don't grade much at all, actually. The only thing that's graded is our teaching textbooks, and that's because it's math on the computer and it grades it automatically for them. And I do like the fact they have some understanding that, like, in the 90s is an A and the 80s is a B, so that's not a totally new concept to them when they go off and take other classes or they go off to college and stuff. But we don't do a lot of grading because I just don't feel like it's important. I feel like it's much more important to understand how much they grasp something rather than how well can they regurgitate those facts for a test or whatever. So we don't do a lot of tests, but with anything we do as far as grades or progress charts or anything like that, those are all private. Those are for you to look at and mom to look at only. We also go through and we will look at what is your best. For some of my kids, their best is an A or is doing it, excelling at the top. For some of my kids, their best is a C. All right. And I always want them to go and look. So sometimes we will go through those math grades and I will look at the past several lessons. I'm happy with whatever you get as long as it's your best. And let's look back here. You've got A, and here you got a C. Do you really feel like that was your best? Is there something that we need to go back and reteach that maybe you didn't understand or were we maybe not trying as hard? And we do talk about that in comparison because I do think it's important to heart check and to check in with our kids to make sure they are doing their best and excelling where they need to be doing. But I don't care as much about the grades. We also have progress charts when it comes to all about reading. They have a chart of, how many lessons, and my kids put stickers on how many lessons they have completed. My kids will compare and go, well, how many more lessons do you have left? How many more lessons do you have left? And it takes a constant reminder to remind them that these are things that are private and that don't need to be shared because we are not competing against each other. We are competing against ourselves and we are making sure we're doing our best. Tip number 3, when there is a big gap, and there is maybe a natural bent towards comparing, it may be time to come in and do different curriculum, guys, especially if you have a younger one that is far surpassing an older one, or a younger one. Like I said, my 4th has some pretty significant special needs. She spent the majority of the beginning of her life. My only goal was to keep her alive and to take care of her physical health. I didn't care if she knew her name, numbers, or her letters, or knew how to read. That was so far beyond what I was concerned with. I was concerned with making sure she could eat because she couldn't eat by mouth, making sure that she could hear because we were having a lot of issues with hearing aids and hearing loss, making sure that she could talk because she had to have reconstructive surgery to make sure that she could talk, right? Those were my primary concerns. So there is a large gap. She's only 12 months behind her sister, but there is years gap on where we are. And if I had just taken her and put her in the exact same curriculum that I had put her other siblings in at the level she's in 1st grade, but she's kind of doing a kindergarten, 1st grade mix of curriculum. If I had taken her and put her in the exact same curriculum I had put her older siblings in, she would be aware of how much that gap is. And it would make her very self-conscious, and I felt like it would kind of be setting herself up for failure. So we actually switched into different curriculum with her when it came to reading. So she did not start with all about reading like all of her siblings did. I also felt like it was a very aggressive approach for the way her mind works. She needs tons and tons of repetition, tons and tons and tons of review, and I I can talk about that in a later video, but she needed different things. And so we did different curriculums, and that also helped with her not comparing to her siblings. And I was really glad that we went that route for her in that particular situation. Another thing you can do is doing group subjects. We do history, Bible, science as a group for all the kids, right? We do spelling and grammar and a couple other things with just the 3 older ones. But doing group subjects is also a great way to help keep that comparison game a little bit more minimal. And the reason I say that is because we can all learn together, but they can have individual assignments based on their ability, right? So if I have one child that is excelling in reading and another one that is struggling, I'm going to read the material out loud. We're going to learn it all together, but then their assignment might be to go out and read additional resources and write me a report, while the middle child might be to just write me a report on what we already read, and the third one might be to just draw a picture or to orally narrate to me what we've already read. Does that make sense? So you can kind of have some equality across the board and have different levels for different kids. I do want to say that in my homeschool, in our homeschool life, everything is not fair. And we do talk about how life is not fair and different people are good or bad at other things. And that happens. We play a lot of games. We do a lot of game schooling. And it's really important to me that my kids learn how to win well and they learn how to lose well. I am just as concerned about being a gracious winner as I am about being a gracious loser and not throwing a fit or quitting before the game's over or anything like that. Both of those skills are incredibly important when it comes to our kids and helping them to understand the value, again, of doing our best unto the Lord and not worrying about man's opinion of us. The last tip is the importance of speaking the truth into our kids' lives. I've talked about this a little bit in other videos, but this is so important, guys. If your kid is struggling with something, again, it could be that they're struggling to that competition level, to an unhealthy level. There's good, healthy competition, and then there's an excessive or that need to be better, right? Look at those heart issues. Examine what's going on. Examine what's going on with your kid that's maybe self-deprecating. I've got both, right? I've got the whole spectrum here. I've got kids who automatically think, I can't do it. I'm stupid. I don't know any better. Of course, they've never been told that from us. They haven't even had a lot of experience being told that from outside opinions. But that is the narrative that they're telling themselves. That is what Satan is putting in their head. I have other kids who think that they are the best. They are the bee's knees at everything. They need to be knocked down a few notches and be put in proper perspective there. Or I have kids who think that they must do X, Y, and Z to earn my favor or God's favor or those things. Again, those are not things they have been told or even necessarily modeled for. But guys, those are the things Satan is putting in their head. So we have to always be aware of what is going on in our kids' hearts and minds as much as possible and speaking the truth to that particular situation. So we do talk a lot about how God has called us to do school, right? God has called us to work. God has called us to do our best in what he's called us to do. God has called us to honor and obey our parents, and he has equipped us for that good work. He has given us everything we need for that. He is right alongside us to help us. He doesn't promise that it will be easy. There will be struggles. There will be temptations. And he will always provide a way out. Guys, he will always help them in those situations. So that's one of the things I have to remind my kids. I also have to remind them to be gracious to one another, to be loving, to speak the truth in love, to have kindness, to not envy others, and those kinds of things. So just understand that you're going to have to look at your kid's particular situation and really dive in deep to why is this happening? What is behind this way of thinking? And what kind of truth can I help with? And maybe that's copying down Bible verses. Maybe it's memorizing that Bible verse together. Maybe it's writing it down and having it on their wall of these are the truths. Here's the lie Satan is telling me, and here are the truths that God is telling me to combat that. I hope this is helpful to you guys. I would love to know if you guys have any kiddos that struggle with this major competition or this idea of passing, right? I would love to know what you guys have found helpful, and tell me all down in the comments what your experience has been. I'm always happy to learn. I'm not the expert by any means, just sharing my personal experience with you guys in hopes that good it can help. I would love if this has been helpful for you guys to like and hit the subscribe button and bell notification to be notified when new videos come out. I post every Wednesday and Saturday on making the most of the little moments in homeschooling, home management, parenting, and everything in between. So if that's topics that interest you, I would love if you guys would take a second and become part of our YouTube family and subscribe. Talk to you guys later. Bye.